start to the south, we move upwards. Where does it end?
Egypt. Yeah.
Why just Egypt? Why is it? I mean, there's an artificial canal which separates it from the other landmass, but what?
Showing that ignorance now, lack of geography.
Okay, let's look at Europe. Is Europe a continent?
You would call it, yes, we do call it continent, don't we?
Okay.
Yeah.
Where does Europe end? on the east, on the west, it ends somewhere along the Atlantic. Yeah. Where does it end on the east?
Europe.
Turkey?
Up to Turkey.
Well, so who decides? If you look at a landmass, if you look at a map, okay, why is one part of this huge landmass called Europe and one part called Asia? Who decided that? How we claim ourselves to the world, and how the world in a particular historical circumstance sees us. Okay, and I think that's really, really important. So we come back to this problem about, well, who is African? And I think my argument would be that you can't define Africa or Africans without their history. Their history, not the history other people see it. And that history is a history of struggles. And it's a history which, over the last 500 years, it's a fairly relatively short period of time in the whole of Africa. Now, Africa, who named Africa?
Good question.
Yeah, British, French, and Portuguese.
Well, go back further. Scipio Africanus was an African. Socrates was an African. Pushkin was an African.
As in, you all originate from there. What do you mean by that? Pushkin.
Are you an African?
I regard myself as African, although I'm from the
Pushkin
Caribbean.
was not different, but very different from you.
Okay.
Okay, just happened to be living in Russia, and you happen to be living in Hastings. Does it make you a Hastings Weller? Or whatever it is you call people from Hastings. The buggers who let the Normans in, The moment you get into sort of biology, you get into the whole racist dialogue. That's how the South Africans did it. They measure. The origins of the Rwanda genocide, the whole, if you trace it goes back to the way in which the anthropologists, Belgium, went around physically measuring. Come back to the problem about, well, who is African? And I think my argument would be that you can't define Africa or Africans without their history. Their history, not the history other people see it. And that history is a history of struggles. The trade routes, you have a wind going up there this one part of the year and going the opposite direction the other way. So you had trade going all the way up to what's called the Persian Gulf, all the way to India. If you go to Cochin, beautiful, beautiful city set on lots of little islands, like Venice, In Cochin, there are people who speak islands where they speak Chinese, and I was there. I met with islands where they spoke Kiswahili.
Where's Cochin?
Cochin is in west of India. Okay, right on the other side, and there were established trade routes from China all the way across to India, all the way across to Africa. I think 2 years ago, the South Africans opened up a new exhibition which blew people's minds. because what they showed, and which was being hidden for a long time, was a silk map dating from around the 11th century. Okay, more or less the sort of same time as the Brits were being defeated by the Normans, just around the corner from here. Okay, they had a map which actually showed what we see now as the parameters of Africa, and that could only have been done by circumnavigating the continent. And this was a gift that was given to one of those merchants or whoever. Okay? So you had all this. You had a whole series of kingdoms created in a number of different places, including in the most well-known is Zimbabwe, which were established more or less the same time as the states in Venice, so on, the city-states, the mercantile states throughout Europe. One of the tragedies of Africa was that in the process of colonization, in order to justify first the period of slavery and then the period of colonization, it required that all evidence of Africans being civilized had to be destroyed, had to be hidden. Yeah. So there was this myth that they don't know how to write, they don't know how to read, etc. And actually, Arabic was very widely used. Amongst the trade routes, that was the only way you could engage in trade. And there was a class of merchants who learned Arabic and who learned that in order to be, and that's why a lot of them were around the eastern coast. And Arabic was an African language, because today they stopped the map here, but you know, there's just a tiny little Suez Canal, much later on. This is the same landmass. People used to be moving in and out of here all the time. If you look at how the British ran this empire, they actually didn't use that many troops. They would use every now and then to massacre if there was mass resistance. But actually, they used a very smart, okay? So what they did was they found compliant local people who they then gave privileges to, etc., gave land to, gave access to, but they were the means of social control. But of course, in that process, people would, you know, being faced with their land being taken away, etc., they would unite. And so attempts were made to try to find reasons for keeping them apart.
So what did you call that?
Decentralized despotism, Mohammad Mamdani called it. And so what you had was rule, in a sense, almost indirect rule, which was carried out through the system of chieftains. Okay? And these were compliant local chiefs. Not so different to how our countries are currently run. Okay. It's been raised to another level where we have compliant governments.
Similar to picking kind of the Rajas in India.
Very similar. It was there that they learned how to do that. In fact, if you look at the civil servants who were responsible for creating that structure, all of them had spent time in India. What is fascinating is when it came to South Africa, okay, the British formed a commission, a royal commission, which went to Canada and looked at what did they look at? They looked at reservation policy, how they dealt with the indigenous reservations. And they then, having understood that, they then used the same policy in South Africa. And the reason why you had Bantustans, etc., all the origins of that came from the British policy originated from an investigation of the same policy originally used in Canada. I love telling this. Very smart. She understood exactly what needed to be done. She did two things. She divided the community in two ways. One, she ethnicized. So the whole thing about ethnic, the word ethnic even was never known that much as a political thing until that time. And so the first division was between Asians and so Asians and Bangladesh, this, there was that, all these different ethnicities. Okay. Second level was horizontal. She gave privilege to a few middle class people who rode on the backs of the struggle of black people and got their positions in House of Commons or the Lords or and became real house niggers. But that's not the first time it's happened in our history. It won't be the last time. Okay, it continues. There are a series of famous photographs which, just as Stalin did later on, the Africans were airbrushed out of. There were African troops there, part of the liberation of Paris. And when they were taking photographs, they had to move these people out of the way. Okay? Because that was part of that forging of a European identity. Okay? The problem is that the European identity has all, like the American identity today, is forged out of a denial of others. Especially the Americans, I don't know what it is about them. They cannot live without some beast out there under their beds. Others to forge that. It's not even for us to become victims of our own history, but that we can be making history by defining an identity. And I think one of the most interesting things about this time, this period that we're living in, is that this is not only happening in Africa, it's happening all over the place. And I think the potentials for the forging of global alliances, not just Pan-African alliances, especially with Latin America, South Asia, the connections that have been, people facing exactly the same problem in their own particular time, okay? And the expressions of solidarity and connections between these. I mean, God, what an exciting time to live.